Hello, teachers, parents, and educational leaders, and welcome to this episode of Breaking Down the B.E.S.T. Now, during this episode, you will get a peek into the members-only area where I have tons of resources to help you make math fun, make it click, and make it stick. There should be a link somewhere around this video where you can learn more. All right, now that we got that out of the way, let's get to it, and let's break down the standard. Welcome to Breaking Down the B.E.S.T, a video series dedicated to breaking down Florida's best standards for math. So grab something to write with and maybe even a snack. This looks good. And don't forget to put a smile on your face. There you go, I see you. And let's dive into today's best standard. Hello everyone, my name is Sarah McCarthy and I'm super excited that you are joining me today as we break down the following standard. It is MA.4.AR.1.3. This standard says that we will solve real-world problems involving multiplication of fractions by whole numbers or whole numbers by fractions. So this is a fraction times a whole number example, and this would be an example of a whole number by a fraction. For the example, it says that Ken is filling up his garden containers with a cup that holds 2/5 pounds of soil. If he uses 8 cups to fill the containers, how many pounds of soil did Ken use? This would result in using this is an expression, but using 8 cups of 2/5. So 8 times 2/5, a whole number by a fraction. By the way, this document that I am marking up all over is not something that I create. It's released by the Department of Education in Florida. They release it to the public, so you can absolutely have access to it. And in these videos, I'm just walking through how I break down the information they provide to help me strategically create the Taking on the Best resources that I'll show you that you have access to with your membership. So I'll show you that in just a second. Let's look at some clarifications. We need to make sure our students that problems include creating real-world situations, using models and equations, and to make sure our fractions represent the same whole. Meaning in the example above, if we're using 8 cups that hold 2/5 pounds, that whole needs to stay the same. The pound needs to stay the same. We can't just switch it in the standard to ounces or anything like that. This isn't a conversion of measurement like that. Not for this one, but there is another standard with that. The expectation is not to simplify or reduce to lowest terms. However, as I've mentioned in other videos, if the opportunity is there, take it. If you have an answer that ends up being 4 3/6, I would absolutely take that opportunity to say, hey, 3/6, that's the same as 1/2. And not take too much time with it, but just to build their number sense with fractions, because fractions are numbers, and the more that they can be exposed to how quantities are equal, the better. So it's not required, but I would still take advantage of it where it makes sense to. We need to make sure that any fractions that students are working with when they're multiplying, that these fractions are less than 1. So no fractions greater than 1 and no mixed numbers. We're not multiplying by those, just fractions less than 1. And make sure they fall within these denominators right there. If you're looking for more of a procedural practice, you want to check out this standard, 4.FR.2.4, where we absolutely practice multiplying fractions times whole numbers and whole numbers times fractions in more of a procedural sense. But this standard is more focused on the real-world situation of it all. This is the measurement conversion standard, so that'll connect down the road. And the real world with data, that will also connect. We'll use some of the skills learned in this standard and apply them when we get there. Okay, some terms that they suggest that you know. Equation. This is an example of an equation. We've got 2 sides with an equal sign, where this 2/5 times 8 is an example of an expression. We're not highlighting the equal sign, we're just looking at a part of it, just the numbers and the operation. And a whole number, well, that's like the number 8. No fractions, no decimals. That's a whole number. So where are they coming from? Well, in 3rd grade, they had the sum of unit fraction skill that they're coming up with. And then in 5th grade, they have to add, subtract, multiply, and divide with fractions in a real-world setting. So this is absolutely going to help them down the road too in 5th grade. So we got to make sure we've got this. It says here that the purpose of this benchmark is to complement the instruction of this standard. That was the one that was multiplying whole numbers by fractions in more of a procedural sense. Just the mathematics happening, not the scenario. What else? This right here, I was reading this and I said, huh? Because I didn't understand what they were saying. Let me see. During instruction, it's acceptable to have students work with problems where fractional parts represent more than one whole. Like a cake recipe calls for 1/3 cup of water and 1 ounce of vanilla extract. And and the baker wants to double the recipe. Okay, now that makes sense. You're seeing my aha moment right now. I thought that they were saying that 1/3 cup represented a whole and that by doubling it, it was going to be more than a whole. So I was trying to double it here and show you, well, that's less than a whole. So just ignore that. What they're saying here is that it's more than one whole. Like if we're doubling water, where our whole that we're thinking of is a whole cup of water, but we're only considering 1/3 cup. So the whole of water and the whole of vanilla, those are the 2 separate wholes. That's what they're referring to there. And then we'd be doubling those. Does that make sense? Because what they're saying is that it should be a part of the same whole, where here we're talking about water and vanilla, and those are different wholes, but we're doubling those wholes and then just figuring out what we need. Okay. I understand. Make sure we have students creating real-world problems like this right here, 3/5 of 10. I think the easiest way is to think about that in terms of distance. Like I've completed 3/5 of my 10-mile run. We need lots of models and explanations relating fraction multiplication to equal group. So building on that prior knowledge that we can relate to whole number multiplication. So like this, 4 times 3/5, normally it would be 4 groups of whatever, and it can still be like that in 4th grade, where it's 4 groups of 3/5 in each group. Be careful down here. They spend a lot of time mentioning this, like how to break down 2 times 6 1/3 into using the distributive property to do that. And that can be confusing, but what they're highlighting is the 5th grade level of where they'll be going next year. But they spent quite a bit of time there. So just keep in mind, this example is not 4th grade, because remember that 4th grade must be less than 1 whole. And this right there, 6 1/3, is way greater than a whole. It's 6 wholes and a third. No mixed, remember the clarification said no mixed numbers, no fractions greater than 1. I love this. It says, for misconceptions and errors, that students may not understand that fractions are numbers. And I wrote, a lot of students get really tripped up with fractions when they just, I know I did as a student too. I was like, oh, not fractions and not decimals. I didn't even think that they were really numbers. To me, it was just more work involved as a student. But really, it's pretty fun when you have the models and they're just numbers. They're parts of numbers. So make sure we give special attention with many different real-world problems and using those visual models. Even here, for this kind of task, encourage models. Model. Draw models using fraction bars or models using number lines. Whatever you need to do to showcase what's going on. And this example I just wanted to show because a lot of times it's, in my opinion, easier to have to model a whole number times a fraction, and it's a little bit more challenging to model a fraction times a whole number. But I love this situation right here that they gave you. So there's 10 pounds of meat and a butcher sells 2/3 of the meat. So we know it's going to be less than 10 that he sells. And when we're thinking about that, when we're modeling it out, which we do in the video lessons, model problems just like that. Okay, so enough talking about what we're gonna go over that's available to you. Let's just get to it. Let me show you. So members, go ahead and click members, enter here. Taking on the best, you might need to log in if it's not saved. We're in 4th grade, AR, and we're on this standard right here. Multiply whole numbers by fractions using real world problems. Okay, so on this page you have, so the bronze, the silver, and the gold members have access to these bronze resources, which are video lessons and printables. So in this first video lesson, we'll be multiplying whole numbers by fractions and also fractions by whole numbers, where we create the word problems. So here's the printable. You can see here we've got 3 times 1/4 equals n. We're going to use a visual and we're going to create a real world problem and solve it. Then we're going to use the commutative property of multiplication, flip-flop the factors that we've got there, and model and show how the model changes when we have that fraction first, 1/4 of 3. And then we create and solve a problem there. So those are fun. Then this is where we are creating and solving equations. So here we are given the problem, but we need to create equations and solve and include a visual model. So it's very intentional in taking on the best. If it says in the standard we need to have visuals, we're going to have visuals in the videos too. Okay, those are your bronze resources. Silver members, you have access to more. And gold members, of course, you have access to this too. These are your printables. Okay, so this is the video lesson. We know because of the icon. And then we follow it up with extra practice. So once they've watched the video, you're probably going to want them to practice on their own, and this provides you with extra practice for that. Then we have a video lesson here and extra practice with different word problems. Here is a math mission where students have to analyze an error, create a real-world scenario, and draw a visual and solve. Putting it all together in those math missions. And then this is the taking on the best problem for today, which goes with this video right here. You just click play and I walk you through, oop, I didn't mean for me to actually click play, but you click play and I walk you through the whole process. Students will have to solve the problem and then they'll watch as 4 characters solve the problem. 3 of them will make a mistake, 1 of them is correct, and yes, those characters are me, dressed up in silly costumes. Then for page 2, this is their detective report. Say who the most reasonable answer belongs to and evaluate the work of the others. So that is your silver resources, and you have your answer keys right there too. You have the gold plan, you have more, you have the mini assessment. Okay, you can see the mini assessment just says show what you know, so it can be extra practice, it can be a practice test, it can be a mini assessment if you choose to use it like that, however you want. But there's about 4 to 5 problems for each mini assessment. These are pretty heavy with work, so there's 4 problems there. This episode right here of Breaking Down the Best is available to the gold members ad-free. It's also on YouTube with ads, but here it's right there with the standard and all the resources that you need. You have your answer key to the mini assessment, and you also have access to McCarthy Math 155, which is a daily skill intervention that's aligned to the Common Core standards, the standards that we used to have in Florida. A lot of schools and teachers asked me to keep this in there, so I wanted to make sure that you had that option. And there's a lot to pull from. Even though it's Common Core based, there's still a lot here that you can use, like multiplying fractions by whole numbers. There's 6 video lessons of practice. So if you have students who are struggling with this skill, you can have them log on here and practice. This is more of the procedural thing, and then there's more word problems right there for you, okay? All right, I think that is it. I hope that breaking down this standard and showing you the resources that are strategically aligned helps you to get a better idea of what it is that's expected from the students. And with that said, I want to remind you that what you do with your life, it really does matter. Thank you so much for dedicating time and energy and focus into this profession, because it really does matter. Thank you for being the leader that you were born to be and activating the best version of yourself every day to be that model for your students of what that looks like. That way they can step into the best version of themselves too. I also want to thank you for inviting me into your classroom and into your educational world. I do not take that lightly, and I just love what I do, and I love being able to support you. So I know you're busy. I'm going to let you go, and I'll see you next time. Okay, so I know that I just said goodbye for now, but I'm gonna ask you to do one more thing, okay? If you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it with your teacher friends or other leaders in education. That's how I get to continue doing what I love to do, which of course is supporting you all to the best of my ability. All right, for real now. Bye.